Good morning everyone, my name is Fahmi from SMA Negeri 1 Banjarnegara, and today I'm participating in NSTC 2026 as the opposition team. Well, today's motions is in post-conflict states, for example like post-civil war, regime change, colonialism, this house believes that history textbook should focus on teaching bottom-up historiography rather than top-down historiography. And positions as the opposition, I would like to debate today's motion. So, first of all, a post-conflict state is not an ordinary society. It is a society that is wounded, divided, and trying to survive after conflicts such as civil war, regime collapse, or colonial trauma. In this kind of situation, the most important thing is not making every single group feel emotionally represented in history textbooks. The priority is rebuilding the trust, the unity, stability, and shared national identity. And for that reason, as the opposition, we believe that history textbooks in post-conflict state should continue to focus on top-down historiography. Before moving further, let me first clarify today's debate. So, a bottom-up historiography focuses on ordinary people, grassroots movement, and social groups in shaping the history. Meanwhile, top-down historiography focuses on leaders, institutions, governments, and major political decisions. And now, we are not saying that ordinary people do not matter. We are not saying that their stories should be erased. Our stance is clear, that in post-conflict states, the primary focus of history textbooks should remain on the broader institution and national narrative because that is the best option to rebuild a society. Now, let me reboot the Prime Minister first. The Prime Minister spends a lot of time portraying top-down historiography as simply glorifying elites or worshipping one great man. But this is completely a straw man. Why? Because top-down historiography doesn't mean propaganda. It doesn't mean blindly praising the presidents or military leaders. On our side, textbooks can still criticize leaders, discuss policy failures, and analyze injustice. The difference is simply the focus of analysis. We focus on institutions, governments, and major political processes because those are the things that shape the entire nations. Secondly, government tells that bottom-up historiography is more relatable and therefore can create unity. We think this misunderstands the purpose of history textbooks itself. History textbooks are not a social media post meant to be emotionally validate every community. Their purpose is to help students understand how societies change, why conflicts happen, and how nations can avoid repeating those mistakes. And for that purpose, top-down historiography is much clearer and more coherent. Because wars are declared by the governments, peace are negotiated by political leaders, and colonization enforced through institutions. Democracies collapse because of failures within the state. If students only focus on fragmented personal experiences, they will lose the larger picture of how history actually works, and they will just get sorrowful stories without getting anything to learn. But our biggest clash with the government comes here. They assume that giving every group more representation automatically creates unity. We think in post-conflict societies, this often does the opposite, because collective memories after conflict are deeply contradictory. One group may see someone as a freedom fighter, while another believes that they were probably a terrorist. And one community believes they were the primary victims, while another believes they suffered more. So, when textbooks heavily focus on bottom-up historiography, every group starts demanding the recognition for their own version of history, and history education will become a competition of victimhood. And instead of healing divisions, society keeps reopening old wounds. We can even observe these problems in many post-conflict societies where historical narratives remain politically contested. When history becomes too dominated by a group, it will potentially create another conflict. And now, let's move into our argument. I will say 3 arguments in today's speech. The first argument, the post-conflict states need a shared national narrative. The second, top-down historiography better prevents future conflicts. And the third, top-down historiography is simply more effective in education. The first argument, Post-conflict states need a shared national narrative because after conflict, society is divided, trust in institutions is weak, citizens no longer feel connected to the nation itself. And at this point, the state urgently needs a common story that allows people to move forward together. A top-down historiography is better at creating this because it focuses on national reconstruction, institutional reform, constitutional change, and collective recovery. So instead of constantly dividing the society into smaller identity groups, it teaches students how is the nation as a whole unified identity. This matters because countries cannot survive if every community only sees itself as a separate victim group forever. For example, after the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, Rwanda deliberately promote a unified Rwandan identity instead of continuously emphasizing competing ethnic narratives between Hutu and Tutsi communities. This was done because constantly focusing on different group experience could bring back division and hatred. In fragile post-conflict societies, dominant focus on different groups' identity can make another potential conflict and delay the national healing. The government claimed that bottom-up historiography can strengthen local representation, but strengthening this too much often weakens the national identity. And national identity is what those countries need most at that time. Another example, in Indonesia itself, when they are still experiencing the colonialism by the Dutch, there is a lot of Muslim movement, for example, like Nahdlatul Ulama or Muhammadiyah in East Java and Yogyakarta, and many others. If history are made based on bottom-up, they would claim that they were better than the other organization. But by using the top-down historiography, we can prove and we can tell that this kind of conflict can be prevented by saying all of that movement as a united movement, as a Muslim movement. And then the second argument, a top-down historiography better prevents future conflict. Why? The government claims bottom-up historiography creates nuance. We think it often creates long-term political resentment because when students are constantly taught history through the lens of group suffering, politics become centered around historical grievance. Politicians can exploit this by saying, your group was betrayed, your community was oppressed, or you deserve revenge. And this keeps conflict alive for a generation. A top-down historiography is better because it redirects the focus toward institutional lessons instead of emotional divisions. The students can learn why government failed, why democratic system collapsed, how authoritarianism rose, and how institutions can prevent a conflict from happening again. We can clearly see this in post-war Germany. German historical education focused heavily on how institutions collapsed under Nazism, how propaganda enabled extremism, and how democracy failed structurally. These are fundamentally top-down lessons designed to prevent future authoritarianism and political violence. That kind of institutional understanding is far more useful for rebuilding a stable country than endlessly competing over whose suffering mattered more. Third argument, top-down historiography is simply more effective educationally. History education needs structure, chronology, and clear cause and effects analysis. Top-down historiography provides this because it focuses on major events, policies, governments, and systemic change. While bottom-up perspectives can absolutely be useful as a supplementary analysis, but when they become the primary focus, history becomes fragmented and difficult to follow. Students are overwhelmed by countless personal narratives without understanding which actors actually shaped the national outcomes. Not every historical factor has equal influence. The decision of a president during a civil war clearly affect history more directly than isolated individual experiences. So if the purpose of textbook is education and understanding, top-down historiography is simply more coherent and more practical. Ladies and gentlemen, government treats history textbook mainly as tools of emotional representation, but in post-conflict states, textbooks are far more important than that. They are tools for rebuilding nations. A rebuilding nation requires a shared identity, institutional trust, political stability, and a coherent national narrative. That is what we proudly oppose.